Hi, everyone.
Okay. Hello,
Hi,
everybody.
Alex, Mohammed.
Hello,
Ismail.
Ismail. Thank you for joining. Thank you very much. We're just going live now. So just to welcome everybody who's logged on to the IBBC Tech Forum discussion. Thank you for all joining up. We still have people logging on, and it's a very well attended event today. I'd particularly like to thank Alexandre Laure, who is the author of the Iraq Monitor section about the digital transformation of Iraq. And he will be talking for maybe 10 to 15 minutes about the key findings, the key recommendations, and his view and his vision for how Iraq could be transformed digitally. We'll be joined also by Mohammed Khudairi, who is an investor and a partner at the Khudairi Group and Chief Executive of Iraq Tech Ventures, and also Ismail Maraqa, who is the chair of the Middle East region of PricewaterhouseCoopers and also a board member of the country senior management team in Iraq. So thank you very much to them. They will be responding to Alexandra's view. I shall also be maybe asking a few questions. I'd also like to welcome some of the distinguished guests that I believe have signed up today, particularly Mr. Arash Al-Dahan, who is the chair of the CMC in Iraq, the Iraqi ambassador to the UK, Mr. Farid Yassin, to the UK, His Majesty's Government Cabinet Office, and also to our members. A number of members are on board: Sterling Education, EY, KPMG, SNC Lavalin, and many others. So thank you all for turning up. So without more ado, I'd like to hand over to Alexandre, if that's okay. He can explain about the 5 key pillars that he has written in the Iraqi Monitor. And also, I believe he's got 16 key recommendations as well to support the development of Iraq. So, Alexandre, if you could unmute yourself, please start away. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon, and good morning to everyone. I hope you will be patient with my accent, so I'll try to the flow. You know, the World Bank Group has been engaged with the government of Iraq for many decades, and as part of our relationship with the government, we are an of the Iraqi economy. Yes, Ashley, you are.
Alexandre, I think the sound is a little bit interrupted, and I wonder if you could possibly just do an audio at this stage. Maybe that will help the sound quality.
Okay, let me stop.
Thank you.
Video. Okay. Is that better?
Yes, thank you. Merci.
Okay. So I was just referring to the biannual publication that the World Bank issue on the economy in Iraq, and the latest edition in spring 2020 had a special focus on laying the foundation for a new economy in Iraq, and that special focus paper actually highlights the needs for a digital transformation in Iraq. This is in the broader context of the World Bank Group twin goals, and also the Middle East and North Africa strategy, which focuses on human capital, digital transformation, and private sector-led growth. The universal adoption of effective application of digital technology is expected to characterize economies of the future. And against this background and the latest outbreak of the COVID-19, we believe that it would be a timely opportunity to feature what will it take for the digital economy to advance in Iraq. And the digital economy actually features prominently in our relationship with the government of Iraq, and it is part of the priority reforms for the strategic note on priority reform areas that we also refer to the Iraq white paper. The World Bank has put together a framework of 5 foundational elements for digital economy. The first foundational element is digital infrastructure, which essentially refers to the wide availability of quality internet. The second foundational element is digital financial services, which is essentially moving towards a cashless economy. The third foundational element is digital platform, which are everything relating to e-government, national IDs, digital exchange, so including both public and private platform. The fourth foundational element is digital skills, which look after a tech-savvy workforce, employable skills, and the tech adoption by all businesses. And finally, the last and fifth foundational element is around digital entrepreneurship and everything that is needed for Iraqi nascent ecosystem to generate new products and services that will be needed for tomorrow. In Iraq, what we have witnessed based on our assessment are signs, even if they are soft signs, they are signs of a nascent digital economy. But those promising developments needs a real government and public sector attention to be taken to the next level. And this means obviously the participation of the private sector, but before that, a government decision at the policy, legal and regulatory level, but also well-implemented action plan. And so I will go over more into detail about the challenge and the opportunity. I have been asked to not over-focus on the problems, which I think everybody is sort of aware of, but I'll go in each of the pillars to highlight those aspects, and I will close with the recommended reform priorities that the World Bank and government of Iraq has identified. I hope I'm not speaking too fast and that everybody can understand me.
Great. Perfect, Alex.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. So on digital infrastructure, as you know, the building of those infrastructure would create immediate jobs opportunity. We believe that the deployment of broadband infrastructure, based on our experience in many countries in the world, can create 2 to 4 additional jobs directly and indirectly. Also, digital infrastructure would augment trade and economic opportunities and therefore diversification for the Iraqi economy. And an increase in internet penetration is associated with higher level of private sector productivity. And all this together is essentially providing what we call higher level aspiration and the ability for the government, businesses and people to take advantage of the digital infrastructure, which is the primary and cross-cutting foundational element for a digital economy. When it comes to digital financial services, in Iraq, we have actually a well-established national payment system infrastructure, which does face multiple challenges. And the main challenge are interoperability between actors. However, we have witnessed actually very important development for the last 2 months with the uptake of e-wallet and also government effort to pay salaries and to socialize the use of cashless payments in Iraq. And the COVID-19 crisis has really sort of created the authorizing environment to be able to advance the cashless economy in Iraq. And one thing that is quite important related to it was the recent attribution by the Central Bank of Iraq of 2 licenses to payment system provider and to allow them to also do e-wallet services with simplified eKYC, which is the know your customer, which is the onboarding for new customer acquisition. When it comes to the third pillars on digital platform, this is probably one area where the government could be doing much more, because there is very little e-government services which are accessible online. There are very little transaction which can actually be pay online. And so the challenges of government to people and government to business services and to allow them to transact online is a critical one. And at the World Bank, we identified that one of the most important aspects of this digital platform is digital ID, which usually serves as the entry point for any of the digital services that the government can offer to its citizens and businesses. I'll move now to the digital skills foundational element.
Basically, this year we are going to focus heavily on 4 projects.
Sorry, I'm having an echo.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry for that. As you know, the digital skill challenge is an important one in Iraq. The ICT sector right now only provides 3 to 5% of the employment, but it is usually a sector that employ young people, and that could be up to 20% of the job created by the private sector. We also see that jobs and skills in the ICT and technology sector are usually quality jobs, can also trigger or catalyze self-employment opportunity, and are usually well balanced in terms of gender. So the representation of female workers in ICT and technology sector is actually quite high vis-a-vis traditional sectors. However, as you know, there is a skill mismatch in Iraq when it comes to the supply and the demand of skills. And so here, what we're really looking at, it's asymmetries of information between, on one side, unskilled people, and on the other side, private sector and even public sector looking at hiring skilled labor. So the effort will be not only on the private sector, but also on the public sector to revise curriculum, and also to be able to propose to the youth of Iraq the latest knowledge to be competitive on the market. Last but not least, on digital infrastructure, which is sort of my area of expertise, or I would call it my comfort zone. The Iraq ecosystem is a nascent one, but it's a very attractive frontier market. It is a domestic market of 40 million consumers, and there is actually limited homegrown technology solution in Iraq. So there is a space, there is a very large space for Iraq innovators and for startups to actually propose new business model products and services that will meet the aspiration of Iraqi consumer. As you know, for the last year, the ecosystem has been featured prominently in the region, including with Lezu. You probably know them. It's an Iraqi startup which was the first one to be selected by Y Combinator, which is a US-based accelerator. And since then, we have seen the establishment of the Iraq Innovation Alliance, which is a consortium of 7-8 support structure in Iraq, and many new entrepreneurship programs which are being put out there even during COVID-19 times. So on digital entrepreneurship, what we are seeing as the next phase of development is really the access to capital to smart capital and many improvements in the legislation to attract investors to invest in the digital ecosystem in Iraq. I will move briefly to the 18 recommendations which were listed in the Iraq Economic Monitor and which are part of the Iraq white paper, for which we had discussed with the government in September, October, and we received renewed commitment towards those potential reform. And I will go briefly, and I'll not go to the 18 in detail, but when it comes to immediate reform area, looking at the infrastructure, what is required is removing restriction for private operators to be able to build on and operate domestic and international fiber infrastructure in Iraq, based on a public-private partnership best practices. And so the lack of PPP framework to attract off-taker in digital infrastructure is a binding constraint to the development of the digital economy in Iraq. You also have two low-hanging fruits in the digital platform. The first one is the update of the e-government strategy and action plan for paperless government, which expired about 5 years ago and should be revised to be able to meet the aspiration of businesses and Iraqi. Also, one thing that we recommended and the government is committed to, it's to disclose online publicly information about tenders and contract awards, starting with obviously the major transaction, but also allowing feedback from the people on each of those transactions going to from the government to the private sector. On digital financial services, the government had drafted with World Bank technical assistant payment system law to facilitate digital payments. This draft law is actually available and should be promulgated as soon as possible to create an enabling environment for digital financial ecosystem. When it comes to entrepreneurship, we believe that the company's registration should be mainstream and also be accessible online. Iraq should be adopting a national law when it comes to private equity and venture capital fund and investment. And also the government should really catalyze the establishment of a seed capital fund, or what we call a fund of fund, to be able to co-invest alongside a private investor in innovative SME in Iraq. And finally, on the skills, immediately what we should pilot, and the bank is committed to that, it's digital trainings program for youth to increase their access to digital wage employment opportunity, such as online freelancing, micro, telework, outsourcing. So I'll stop there in terms of immediate measure, which are actually already available and on which the government could actually act fairly quickly. Now, looking at more short to medium term measure, I'll go very fast, but essentially on infrastructure, it is the allocation of a 4G spectrum. It is also to develop the appropriate PPP environment for the critical fiber infrastructure, so that we could achieve up to 10% fiber connectivity by 2023, which may look very ambitious, but that is still possible. On e-government, the rolling out of national ID cards is a fundamental element to integrate each of those 5 foundational elements, and to be allowing mobile-based citizen feedback is important to improve each of the government services which are provided to the private sector and its citizen. On digital financial services, once we have the law, which I refer to as a low-hanging fruit and immediate measure, there is a set of regulation that will need to be implemented. And there is sort of a bold approach that the government will have to digitalize most of cash transaction to its public servants, which is the only way to have a massive uptake and usage of digital financial services in the country. And when it comes to entrepreneurship and skills, which are more soft measure, but we advocate for electronic system for the issuance of visa, particularly for entrepreneurs and foreign investors. Also adopting all of our key doing business recommendation when it comes to starting a business, and to be able to also walk the talk from offline to online curriculum, particularly when it comes to digital skills in primary and tertiary institution in Iraq. I will stop there, and I'm happy to take any question from the audience and the panelists. And you will allow me to say that I don't know, in case I do not have the readily available answer to your question. Okay. Thank you.
Alexandre, thank you very much again. Could I ask Ismail Maraqa to maybe respond to that and to raise any issues that you maybe think you'd like to bring up?
Thanks, Ashley. Thanks, Alex. So Alex, I mean, in your paper, I mean, when you did the paper, I mean, I have no doubt Iraq has the digital workforce. They have the infrastructure somehow, and the government is one of the largest massive users of e-payments, if you want. But how do you think Iraq can, bring something that will put all these elements together in order to take the country to the next level, whether when it becomes to the, improving the networks, getting the ministries to work together and what have you? I mean, have you touched on this on your paper? I mean, is it, or has it been discussed during the time when you did the paper?
Alexandre?
I'm sorry, the last 15 seconds. The last 15 seconds sort of cut quite a lot on my side.
Could you repeat the question, please, Ismail?
Okay. So Alex, I mean, how do you see Iraq being able to put all these pillars, if you want, or whatever is available within the country, whether it's the capabilities, the applications, the online payments, the experiences we have so far, in a place where we are able to take this to consolidate and be able to take this to the next level?
Alex, you might need to unmute yourself.
Yes. Do you want me to go question by question,
yes,
or also take?
Yes,
from?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay. So I think what's important. It's not necessary for the government to restate their commitment to the higher level objective of advancing a digital economy, because I think that we had enough event, fora, paper which were drafted around why it's needed to have this digital transformation. I think that one of the issue, and we face that as a bureaucracy for any private sector, is really to move to the plan to actual implementation. Mm-hmm. And so that's why in the paper the first 8 reform action that we recommended are fairly straightforward, because we know that they are either in draft version somewhere in government, or they just need to be submitted to be passed and adopted as a law or regulation. So I think moving into implementation is probably one of the things that we could improve. The second thing, and it pertains to financial and private sector development. we are essentially in a business of addressing coordination failure. So no ministry alone, no regulator alone in Iraq can actually take this agenda, in silo. And so one thing that we found probably difficult, but even inside the World Bank, and so the governments essentially have the same weaknesses that you will see at the World Bank, is to be able to establish a coordination mechanism along line ministries and regulators, so that we have input and implementation from several actors at the same time, on the public sector side, but also on the private sector side. So that public-private dialogue and addressing this coordination failure is something that is absolutely essential. And the last, and I know that IBBC is working on that, but one thing that I found that we could be doing better in Iraq is private sector advocacy. So the private sector, and particularly the actor in the digital economy, to be able to express very clearly what are the gaps and what are their needs, so that this can become a reality. So, I mean, very broadly, that would be the three points which I believe could still be improved in Iraq.
Ismail, does that satisfy you?
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Mohammed, you come from the family private sector, and that was Hugo Alexandre just referenced that. Would you like to comment on your side of things as a private investor?
Sure. Thank you, Ashley, and thank you, Alex, for that comprehensive plan. I think what I really liked hearing about that is I think we talked very in a macro sense about digitizing Iraq's economy. I think you've laid out some really clear steps of how we get there. And I also want to be respectful of the questions coming in, so we'll hopefully sidebar those and readdress those. But from my perspective, and sorry if you've heard me say this, but I think this is an existential crisis for Iraq. I think now is the time to diversify and digitize the economy. Given all the challenges and the price of oil, I think, yes, we've had some really good discussions, and I've attended some of these discussions with the government in terms of their readiness and willingness to transform. But I think the urgency hopefully can kind of be elevated significantly higher. In terms of, I just wanted to touch on one thing before talking about the family aspect, which is, for us, for me, I see it as like a triangle, where the governments, NGOs, and universities sit on the top. You have the entrepreneurs, and then you have the VC, the private equity money. And I think you're starting to see a few of those components, particularly on the government and NGO side, as well as on the entrepreneur side. What I think is still lacking in Iraq is the capital, access to capital, which is the VC, which is kind of where I step in and looking to support that. So, in traditional markets, you have large private equity and VC institutions. In Iraq, you have a lot of family corporates, like my own family, the Khudairi Group. And so what I would really like to promote and like to have a lot of these family corporates start talking about is, how do we support this ecosystem? What is our involvement? And I see our involvement as mentoring, taking on strategic investments into startups or technology companies that may eventually disrupt some of our traditional businesses. And so I think this is the way that I see it going. I don't see traditional VC setting up shop in Iraq due to the challenges, and some of those challenges should and need to be addressed by hopefully the government. We need digital registration, as Alex spoke about. We need easement in terms of foreign investment. I know they've made it a little more restrictive, and hopefully updating some of the tax legislation and tax laws so things are a little more visible. So there's quite a bit that the government really needs to work hand in hand with the private sector to make this a reality. Yeah, so I'll just stop there and hand it back over to you, Ashley.
Alexandre, just on that point, a lot of this does hinge on the government. And I mean, who will be able to encourage them to actually do things? We have a comment here from Saad Al-Saraf, which says, he delivered a paper that was going to be 70% connectivity by 2016. You know, so these things go around in circles. Do you have any leverage over encouraging the government to actually action these things? If not you, who? Alexandre?
Thank you. Yes. I mean, I don't know, you know, in terms of the leverage. However, what I can say is that our relationship with government, I think, is actually quite positive and constructive. And in fact, very often when we discuss with Iraqi players in the digital economy, they tell us exactly that. If you are not able to help the government move on that, we don't believe that individually, as a business, as an entrepreneur, you know, as a citizen, we probably won't be able to help them move. So the way I see it is, it's sort of a chicken and egg, because when you look at the digital economy, you know, provided that we believe is a priority, because obviously some people will say that in Iraq there is many more priority than the digital economy, but provided we all agree it is a priority, it is very difficult for a government that is sort of emerging in that space to believe until they see some of the results. And really what our approach is going to be at the country level as a World Bank, it's to help on one side the government, you know, to take informed decision when it comes to policy reform, regulation, and implementing it so that it trickle down to businesses and people. But it's also alongside the policy, because nobody feeds on a report and piece of paper that very often end up in a drawer, but to also demonstrate that some action can actually have an impact. And at the country level, the World Bank is actually working with the government on digital skills, on entrepreneurship, access to finance, cashless payment with different parts of the government and also the regulators, to put in place what we call a pilot. And I know that many people will probably criticize the pilot approach when you look at a country like Iraq that is so massive in terms of population and opportunity. But we believe that a pilot approach, for example, to what Mo mentioned in terms of access to capital for innovative SME, has much more chances to be owned by the government and therefore to be scaled by the government than only doing reform or trying to be too ambitious with a mega fund. Like Mo mentioned, it would make no sense for the government to come in with a $1 billion fund to invest in SME while they don't have the regulation. While implementing the regulation and doing a pilot so that you can see the results on them and actually scale them, it's essentially our approach right now with the government of Iraq on multiple fronts, including economic diversification.
Alexandre, was that just an announcement then? That, I mean, that sounds quite exciting, and I'm not sure the world knows about this.
Maybe because we don't we probably don't advertise enough. You know, we like to say that we're advising our clients in the background or the shadow, because we don't have necessarily the need like other development partners, you know, to be on the forefront. So be sure that at the World Bank you have people which are highly dedicated to Iraq. I mean, starting with myself, you know, we can work in a country where things are easier and etc. And you can see the dedication of the World Bank team, staffed in Iraq, both in country and outside of the country. And we are actually coming out of a very difficult situation since end of September. Where you had back-to-back essentially restriction on mobility and high uncertainty for firms and cities. And as we go out of this phase into a recovery phase, the World Bank wants to be there to assist the government of Iraq, both from the recovery phase, but also what can only be a growth phase in 2021.
Thank you. Ismail, did you want to raise anything else before I go into more general questions?
And I'll give the floor to others. I have a few questions, but I'd rather have others ask questions than I'll come at the end.
Okay. Just to say that we have a couple of questions here, Hugo, from Xuan Daizi. One of them really raises the issue of lack of data management. How can that be tackled? And the second question says that there seems to be some reluctance on behalf of central government to invite external leading tech companies to support them, like Microsoft, Amazon's, and SAP. Is that true? And if that's the case, how can that be tackled? A couple of questions there.
Yes. So on the first one on data management, I agree that it is a enormous challenge for actually any government in the world, regardless of their level of development. And there are different ways to look at data management, particularly when it comes to consumer and citizen. So I will say that there is sort of, the European model, which is very much consumer-centric on the consumer rights and a high level of scrutiny when it comes to data management. Then you have sort of more of the American way of looking at it, which is sort of more free in a way that data serves business bottom line, and there is more protection on the business side than on the consumer. And then you have sort of the Oriental, so an Asian model, which I think applies in the Middle East, where data management is also a public policy tool. And a way for government to really think their development strategy. So I would say a more conservative way at looking at data management, and sometimes people will say a less sort of transparent way of looking at data management. The issue with data management and cybersecurity, and I'm not going to go too much into that because you had some events earlier on, is that we move from the 1890s, where you could fix an IT problem by buying a software, having a bunch of IT people helping you in-house, to something that is more solution as a service, where you cannot just buy and fix a problem with 2-3 guys in-house, but it require much more effort. And I often refer the issue of data management in many of our countries with a sort of a lack of understanding of what it takes to establish a long-term capability in-house in those public institutions, and the level of scrutiny you need when it comes to security issue, upgrades, etc. And many of our countries, I think, are still stuck in that era where they think that by buying a solution or hardware will be enough to be fixing those digital issue.
So
and
thank you.
The second,
yeah, sorry. Carry on, Alexander. Sorry.
Yes, please.
I
just wanted to. The second question, I just wanted you to rephrase the second.
What it was how can the government encourage some of the big FANGs, the big technology companies, to come into Iraq? There seems to be a reluctance to do so.
Question. Yes, so one of the measure that we mentioned, which one is immediate and the other one is more medium term, it's in fact is to allow an entry point for the private sector. And like Khudairi mentioned, the environment very often for private investor is actually not necessarily improving in Iraq, and we have what we call positive and negative reform. And so that's why we're advocating for removing those restriction, improving investment promotion policy. There is a national investment committee. There is a lot of work done around that. But at the end of the day, what really will be a game changer is to allow new entrants and so to increase the level of competition regardless of the sector in Iraq. And the reason why large technology company or very large investors have not even very large, even like medium-sized investors have difficulty to look at the Iraqi market, essentially because they don't see the entry point that allow them to compute the equation between the risk and the rewards, because there are too many unknown when it comes to many aspects of the digital economy.
Thank you very much. Now we're getting a lot of questions here. I don't know whether I could just throw them out more generally, and maybe Ismail or possibly Mohammed could respond. But one of the questions is there are two major government banks that still use paper for transactions. How exactly can these banks be made to jump into modern technology? Any answers there?
Go ahead.
No, please. This is, I think, your expertise. I was going to build on the investment side.
I mean, although one can say they have to change within the inside, but I mean, these banks, they own one of the largest e-payment platforms in Iraq. So although they have not reformed themselves, I think they are providing the e-payment services across Iraq through different platforms, and which in some they are partners in. Is that safe to say, Alexander?
Yes, correct. And I will just add that one aspect that our financial sector team is working on is to help reform the large state-owned banks and many of these public outlets which are lagging behind the private sector. And while there is sort of uptake, I think that maybe the weak link is very often the usage. So you could have a payment, wire payment of salaries or transfers of salaries through e-wallet, but then what the end user will do is to cash out, while what you would want to see is not only a uptake, so an increase in digital accounts, but also a share of an increase in the usage within the digital financial ecosystem. And so I think that we're seeing good progress there, and there is still a need to socialize to the end user, may they be the merchant or the citizen, that they should remain in that cashless loop and remain within those digital transactions, which I think is very difficult given the history of Iraq, the war, and the fact that it's a cash-based economy.
Thank you, Mohammed. You were raising something.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on something which I think Alex was speaking about. We were talking about these big tech companies, the Microsofts, the Googles, and I think it would be wonderful to see these companies come in and help really transform and digitize. I think that's, to be honest with you, I think we need to, walk before we run here. And I think what we need to focus on is, we as business leaders, as Iraqis, Iraqi diaspora, either operating or working in or out of Iraq, need to take the steps in investing into digitizing the economy. And really, I think what's going to happen is you have a lot of traditional businesses, small, medium, some large family businesses, but we need to change the mindset of a lot of these businesses and business leaders to understand that, you may be supporting the economy or investing in these companies or startups or entrepreneurs. You're not going to have full control over these companies. So I think there's a bit of a generational divide in terms of some of these, some older industrialists in Iraq and some of the newer investors looking to take part and support in the economy. So my point is, let's not wait around for Uber and Google and all that. I know Uber's already there through their Careem investment, but we need to take those initiatives and support the ecosystem and moving itself forward. And then I think you'll see an entry of more of the international players.
I'm getting a lot of questions, and they're often very long ones, so bear with me if that's all right. I've got one here from Ali Shabazz, one of our members, and he says, thanks very much. The Iraqi government does not have the time and human resources to implement a lot of these things, but the private sectors, the NGO and academics can take the lead. There was a stronger movement in 2010 to implement the e-government platform. Nothing's happened subsequently. So please, can you add your recommendations and advice to the Iraqi government that private sectors, NGOs and academics should play a major role in digital transformation? Can you do that, Alexander?
Yes, with pleasure, and we often as well, remind the private sector that in any such contract you have rights and obligation, and which are two of the measures that we are recommending when we mention a framework for PPP or entry points for the private sector. It's essentially to codify what are those rights and those obligations. Because essentially, as of today, given the history of Iraq, from a private sector perspective, it only looked like as a business that you would have obligation, coupled with uncertainty, doesn't really make a good formula to innovate, to sustain your operation, or even to put more money to develop the economy. And therefore, those rights and obligations are very important. But in one of my events in Africa, I was asking, yes, they were always complaining government is corrupt. But I say, if there is someone that is being corrupted, there is a corruptor somehow. So the conversation cannot just be on one side, either the private sector does not invest enough, or the public sector is not doing the minimum reform that is needed. It's actually that dialogue between public and private that is important. But in fact, for us, it is very important that the government allow the mobilization of private sector capital and expertise to address those challenges that they know that they don't have both the fiscal space, so the financial resources, nor the human resources to actually deliver on those objectives.
Thank you. Another question here. Is there any central government body, a working cell, that takes on the responsibility of implementing and following up the transformation of government entities from manual to electronic? That's Hadil Hassan. Is there any particular unit that takes this in hand?
Yes, so they are at the level of the Prime Minister office. There is one unit which I think is called the e-government transformation or digital transformation unit. You would have to look at the Arabic wording, but there is a small team there that is coordinating this multi-sectorial agenda. But as I mentioned, the issue is also the ownership at the level of the line ministry. Also, when it comes to reform, the Prime Minister office has established in February a high-level committee for business reform. Many of you in the call will say, yeah, but it looks similar to what we saw in the past. The difference there in that high-level committee is that we also ask that the Prime Minister office has all the relevant line ministry involved, like trade, justice, etc., so that it can move those reforms that will cut across sector. So I think that there are entry points in the government, but probably there is not enough resources. I mean human resources to actually coordinating that daunting task, because there is probably more people on the World Bank side that you would have on the side of the government trying to coordinate that agenda, while for them it's a full-time job, and for us it's only a part-time job.
Alex, if you allow me, Ashley.
Yeah,
Alex, would the World Bank be in favor of recommending having a ministry of digital economy and entrepreneurship like UAE or Saudi or Jordan, if you want, which is basically converting your ministry of telecom into your digital ministry, because telecoms is currently handled by the regulators in the region. So would the bank be of this recommendation? I mean, to converting one of the older ministries who used to take care of telecom into the digital owner in the country. Would the bank be supportive of this, or has this been discussed?
Not only the bank would be supportive, but I can tell you that at my own level, I recommended to Jordan to move it to the digital economy and entrepreneurship. And in Mali as well, in several West African countries, in the last 2 to 3 years, you have seen those changes, which was based on World Bank recommendation and task that I have been leading with my team. So I think that in fact, one of the way of addressing the digital economy is to recognize that ICT is not enough. That's only 1/5 of the problem, and that one ministry should be anchoring the digital economy agenda. So that is in fact is a very relevant point. It also needs to be translated into something real, you know, like changing the name. I think is fairly easy, but then you need to repatriate or reorganize some of the departments, and also you know, provide the budget for that sort of reconfigure ministry to be able to operate. But you're absolutely right, and that's something that we do advocate.
And I hope, I mean, with the new cabinet coming, maybe this is something the World Bank can help with, and we as a private sector will be more than happy to support, because we have worked with, you know, with such ministries across the region, including Jordan, Saudi, UAE. But I mean, I think this is one step in the right direction to bring everything together, and timing could not be better. I mean, than now with the new, you know, with what the COVID is forcing on us, how to become digital fast, and the new cabinet coming. I think this is an excellent time for such a thing to be formed.
Mohammed.
Yeah, I actually had a question for Alex as well. I see on the you know, in the panel discussion or participants, we've got a lot of people from the ecosystem. I saw Sandug on there, Alice Bosley from 51 Labs, and it's great to see that. I think one of the challenges that I've found in Iraq is the ecosystem is still quite fragmented. So while, you know, I think it's starting to unify and codify in a meaningful way, Alex, I think you, as kind of the lead here, World Bank, kind of working with the government, you're potentially going to bring other initiatives on in the coming months and years. You talked about the coalition of some kind. What is that coalition, and how can we, as all, you know, everybody on this call, I see a lot of excellent questions, very you know, nuanced questions. How can we really unify and take a lot of these initiatives to the government, so that obviously World Bank is communicating this, but you also have small tech companies and NGOs that really want to be heard, and how do we do that? How do we unify this? And have you done this in other markets?
That's actually it's a very good point. Yes, we have done that in several markets where we are helping the private sector to structure its advocacy and policy formulation and strategy. And I think that in Iraq you are seeing a bit of that, you know, with the sort of the launch of the Iraq Innovation Alliance, which brings together key players in the ecosystem. And I think that one of their statement of purpose is to really be acting as a sort of think tank and lobby for government when it comes to priority reforms on entrepreneurship and investment. And as I mentioned before, then obviously there is a need to link it with government system and conversation. And as a matter of fact, I can testify from my own experience in Iraq, which was a succession of failure last year. I've been 9 times in Iraq from February to October. And for those that would remember, we did start a public-private dialogue around the digital economy. We tried that in February, in March, in April. And I think that back then, it was probably too early, and we were trying to address too many sort of coordination failure at the same time. While as of today, I've seen, I think, an increase in the private sector in terms of what they want and what they want to achieve for the digital economy in Iraq. And we have also seen the government ramping up their commitment and their thinking with the Digital Mashreq Forum in June and subsequent MOUs and documents they have signed with the bank. And so while it was not successful about a year ago, now plus the opportunity provided by mobility restriction with the protests and COVID-19, I think that there is sort of a window that we should leverage as of now. And we have seen in many countries, we call that it's innovation for policy, so I for policy, how we really try to bring together the government and the private sector. And probably in Iraq, we may want to be less holistic, especially if we don't have yet a digital economy ministry, and really take the conversation, sector by sector. So you could have a discussion around skills, you could have a discussion around the entrepreneurship, a discussion around the cashless economy, around fiber connectivity, which are very different topic, but we could have this public-private dialogue in those various fronts. And I do believe, with my limited experience in Iraq, that while we sort of failed about a year ago, I think that a second attempt this year would probably have more chance to succeed.
I agree with you. Ashley, maybe as a takeaway, we can share some information on the Iraq Innovation Alliance, if that's okay for people.
Absolutely.
To learn more about.
I could maybe invite you all to sum up your thoughts at this stage, if that's okay. There's a very long list of questions and observations going on the chat list here. I can't, unfortunately, cover it all, but Mohammed, if you'd like to maybe start off just summarizing, and maybe then you, Ismail, and maybe Alex, you can have a final word on everything.
Sure. Thanks, Ashley. And again, there's a long list of questions, and I love seeing this excitement. I think I want to thank Alex for his discussion and really outlining clear steps. Again, this is concrete recommendations that he's providing. Again, my thought is this: I think we are starting to see a change of mindset in Iraq. I think this is needed, and we as the business leaders, as the thought leaders, as the head of NGOs and universities, need to be the ones to continue this move forward to a digital economy. Because if not, and I saw a lot of comments on there, Iraq can be in very difficult shape, as you saw, nearly a 10% contraction as estimated by the World Bank. So this is really important in the short term, medium, long term to help digitize and come on board. Iraq has the capability to do it, and investors like myself and other families that are leading business families in Iraq hopefully will get on board to support this transition. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mohammed. Nothing much from my end. I would like to thank everyone for joining. This is really exciting to see old friends, who are still interested and willing to do something in Iraq. I think, again, this is the right time. I am very bullish and optimistic about Iraq, and I hope the oil prices will pick up by year, and this which will give Iraq some economic push. So I think with the new cabinet, alignment with neighboring countries, good oil prices, I think things will come back towards beginning of next year, hopefully.
Thank you. Nice optimistic note. And Alexandra, you've been talking a lot. I'd like to thank you enormously for all your work. Is there some simple things you want to leave us with?
There is actually 3 takeaways from this this conversation today, which were not in the report, but which I would sort of keep it for the next step. I think Ismail mentioned, the need for sort of a more public sector coordination and consolidation with, for example, the establishment of this digital economy ministry, or moving the ICT ministry into something a bit larger to cater for the digital economy. I think that's actually something quite good to send a signal, in terms of building trust. That's actually the first takeaway I got from today. The second one is, and I'm getting the energy from Mo, is maybe, yes, it is time to restart this public-private dialogue. We may have failed last year, or at least this was not followed by, actionable and concrete next steps. But today, the digital economy in Iraq has actually made a fantastic progress, especially when you consider the 4 months of protests and now almost 3 weeks of COVID-19, and the ecosystem and the digital economy is much more advanced this year than it was a year ago. sort of trying to sort of as an honest broker to move the conversation.
We're just losing you, Alexander.
The sector and the last point. Can you hear me?
Well, I think just the last point again would be very helpful. Thanks. You went off in a weird sound.
Yes. So the last point is on the demonstration effect. Moving on the market, doing stuff, showing that we can have even small results, so that people can see that Iraq can be successful in the digital economy. So that's my point, I think, and very concrete demonstration effect on the ground with some pilot that could be financed by the World Bank Group.
Okay, that sounds really positive. And thank you very much indeed, Alexander, for your report, for your time and answering lots of questions today. I think we'll be hearing more from you in the future, and I'm glad that the World Bank is sitting behind the Iraqi government, supporting it, helping the digital economy grow. Very confident that's going to happen. I'd very much like to thank Mohammed Khudairi, who is showing remarkable leadership, I think, amongst the families in Iraq. So thank you, Mohammed. And Ismail, thank you so much as well for your contribution and attention here. Alexandra, enormous thanks to you. Just one or two final things. Firstly, I'm thinking about having e-government as the next subject, and I'm very much hoping we can have some British leaders on that who are leading the world in e-government. And the second thing is that the Iraq-Britain Business Council has just published a 13-page document on the way forward for Iraq, which outlines in quite substantial detail, rather like the World Bank, what the private sector can do and how it can contribute. So I would encourage you to read the Advisory Council's document. You can find it on our website, linked to the press release about the article, which has come out today. And I hope that you will find that also useful too. So thank you to everybody who's logged on. We've had, I think, the record amount of people listening in. It's a really healthy mix of people. I've got to apologize to the ambassador. It's the ambassador to America, not to the UK. So thank you for that. And to everybody who's been listening in, thanks once again, and stick with us. Thanks particularly to Alexander, and goodbye from us all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.